If you're a Metroid fan, I'm sure you've already heard the disappointing news that they've decided to scrap the current Prime project and start over from scratch. What you probably don't know is that what caused this was the release of another game. I would have said something about it sooner, but I've been a little distracted doing some very important projects lately. Seriously though, not long after the release of Darksiders 3, Nintendo decided their game wasn't good enough and that they needed a complete do-over. And it's not hard to see why. Darksiders 3 is like a modern Metroid Prime if it played like God of War. It doesn't just have similar core elements that make it part of the Metroidvania genre, they straight up made their own version of Samus. All of the weapons are a melee equivalent of her beams, specifically the Plasma, Wave, Phazone, and Ice beams. I realize what the easy counterpoint is here, but these aren't simply generic elemental weapons that just open different colored doors. Each weapon also grants you at least one traversal technique that came straight from Samus's repertoire. I'm sure you'll recognize the grappling beam, the shine spark, the wall climb, and the spider morph ball. If you can't see the resemblance here, you probably have never played a Metroid game before. On top of that, many of the areas have a similar atmosphere to those of Metroid, particularly the surface with the overgrown vegetation and giant tree, and the submerged ruins that are just a couple of Chozo statues away from being perfect. One of the only distinctions between Metroid and Darksiders is the way you navigate. One provides you a map, and the other gives you a drunk compass.
I thought the bad guy was east.
It's almost like someone at Gunfire Games walked into a meeting a couple years ago and said, what if we made our own Metroid game before Nintendo makes another? Of course, that's not the only game they ripped off of. Like the majority of games since late 2011, they decided to borrow some ideas about difficulty and methodical combat from Dark Souls.
You're a goddamn genius! You are goddamn gifted!
All of the enemies hit you like a truck, which actually makes them a threat. They also all have these little maneuvers before their attacks that trick you into dodging early and subsequently wreck you. And then, when it throws groups of enemies at you, which happens a lot, they are so much more terrifying than the bosses, because during boss battles, you only have to focus on one target. But in groups, if you make one wrong move, they will all strike at once and instantly eviscerate you. It makes combat incredibly satisfying because no matter how good you get at the game or how many levels you gain, there is always a chance you will lose. However, even though the enemies are unforgiving from start to finish, there's one piece that doesn't sit well with me personally. The combat complexity never grows beyond precisely timed dodges and strikes. So once I got some practice with these mechanics, my skill quickly outpaced the difficulty. Especially when I started gaining some levels and realized there was only one important stat. It caused this awkward progression where the beginning of the game was significantly harder than the end. Maybe they intended for you to feel like this unstoppable force that was gaining momentum, but I prefer for combat to evolve and present new challenges rather than just letting me steamroll through the game. Besides this personal complaint, the game actually only has two real flaws. The first of which is that the story execution sucks. There's nothing wrong with the fact that it's actually just one half-baked reason for Fury to go on a quest to beat the crap out of Skeksis, Mordekaiser, Jenova, and the rest of the Seven Deadly Sins. In fact, some of my favorite games had super simple plots like this, or none at all. The issue is that it tries so hard to pretend that it has a complex story with an abundance of depth and twists, but it doesn't. So you end up with all these awkward moments like this.
Oh no, not the horse. What was his name again? George. You're gonna make it. I swear.
Or maybe not. You've only been in like one scene. The second flaw is that it doesn't even compare to a real Metroid game. But that's okay. Darksiders 3 is still a fun game overall. It offers several decent challenges and some cool places to admire as you wander through its environments. As long as watching an elven dominatrix fail to develop as a character isn't a deal breaker for you, it's a mildly entertaining way to kill 14 hours. Even if it had nothing to do with Metroid Prime 4 getting rebooted.